Well, hello, I'm Doug Apple, back with another special interview for you today, and our topic is fraud and waste. Have you seen the headlines? Has it been bantied about on your social media feed? Fraud and waste. And we're talking about in healthcare and in government. And we have our expert on the line with us. He is Mike Sharman, the legal counsel for Share Healthcare. So he knows a lot about healthcare. As an attorney near Washington, D.C., he's following the fraud and waste. He's been involved in the government himself. So we're looking forward to your insights, Mike Sharman. First, let me share with you this one headline, because we'll start with this idea of fraud and waste in healthcare. And what our average listener does not want to be is on the short end of the stick of fraud. And when it comes to healthcare, I bet most people feel like I'm going to end up on the short end of the stick of this thing. But here's this headline. This came from KFF Health News, article by Julie Appleby. The headline is, quote, "He had short-term health insurance, but his colonoscopy bill was still $7,000. Now, the whole article kind of makes this guy look like he came up on the short end of the stick and fraud was involved. But I'm going to let you address that. You've seen this news item, Mike Sharman. Talk a little bit about the cost of this colonoscopy, how this guy, he had short-term health insurance. He thought he was not going to get stuck with thousands of dollars in a bill. None of us listening right now want to get stuck with thousands of dollars in a bill that we don't, it's not right. What can we do about it? Talk a little bit about this article and give us some wisdom and direction.
Well, I appreciate that, Doug. So let's actually give the numbers this guy was stuck with. So his doctor suggested a colonoscopy just because he was at a certain age, not because it was for preventive, supposedly, which is very controversial about colonoscopies. It wasn't to diagnose a symptom or a concern they had. It was simply a preventive one. So he looked at his short-term policy. It looked like, from the language he was reading, it looked like it would cover 80% of cancer screening. So he and his doctor thought that meant this. So the bill that he got was $10,723, which had $1,436 for anesthesia, $1,039 for recovery room. His insurance plan paid $817.47. And then they had a little bit of a discount, but he was given a bill, the remaining bill of $7,226.71 for this colonoscopy, which was not medically necessary, but was just one that the providers tend to say, well, if you're between these ages, you probably want to be getting colonoscopies, annually or frequently. Well, just imagine you're supposed to be annually getting something that costs $10,000. Well, and Doug, you had mentioned, fraud and waste. So I think it's fraud to be charging $10,000 for a colonoscopy. The prices for colonoscopy across the nation and sometimes just across cities range from $1,250, not $10,000, $1,250 to really a maximum of $4,800. So this guy was charged a double of what the maximum really ought to be, and 5 times as much, or more than 5 times as much as what it should be at the low end. Whatever, when you have a range of $1,250 to $4,800, and he's being charged $10,723, and left with the bill after insurance, which is like $3,000 more than the upper end of the scale, you have fraud and you have waste. So I think one thing that whenever anybody's being told by their doctor to get a colonoscopy, they really want to ask, well, is this just because I hit a certain age? Mm-hmm. You're being told that by whatever medical journal that, because I'm in this arbitrary age category, I ought to be getting a colonoscopy? Or is there a concern that you have that you want the colonoscopy to actually diagnose?
Now, Mike, you mentioned earlier that this idea of preemptive or preventative colonoscopies is controversial. Mm-hmm. How is it controversial?
Right. Well, when you look at the actual studies on colonoscopy can itself create injuries. there's risk factors, and if anybody gets a colonoscopy, they're asked to sign off against these risk factors. One of the risks is perforation of the colon. There's, and a number of others, but that's probably the main one, which is a pretty big risk factor. And so you want to weigh, and there's other problems, but when you are looking at the studies on colonoscopies, they talk about how many times it actually is helpful and how many times it's not. And then how many times does it create an injury, how many times does it not. So I don't know about you, but if I'm driving a vehicle in which I'm told that I'm going to have X amount of risk for doing a certain maneuver on the car, and I don't need to do that maneuver, why would I do it?
Right.
So I hear about the issue of prevention, but this is a lot more invasive than, let's say, having a scan for breast cancer annually. This is an invasive procedure that at its least is going to cost you $1,200. At most, it should only cost you $4,800, but we see here it costs this guy $10,000. So it's not medically necessary. It's not like, we suggest that you do 15 minutes of exercise per day. This is, an invasive procedure that does have actual physical risk associated with it.
Yeah, I'll say that my doctor here in Tallahassee stopped ordering colonoscopies unless, like you said, there's some symptom that you're having to dive in and diagnose just because of its invasiveness.
Okay, was that the explanation he gave, because it's invasive, or was it the financial reason, or maybe a combo of both?
No, he literally, because for example, Capital Health Plan, which is located here in Tallahassee, colonoscopies are free, at least to the if you have the Capital Health Plan, CHP they call it. So he said he and his wife are both doctors, and he said that they have backed off of ordering invasive things like colonoscopies unless it's necessary.
Right, and that's in a town where you can get it for free, or a large amount of your population can.
Right, yeah.
As opposed to $10,700. So I think your doctor is being a good, wise doctor of let's only do what is medically necessary. Mm-hmm. And you introduced me as being the general counsel for Share Healthcare, and that's our prerequisite for sharing. Is the bill you're submitting medically necessary? So in a colonoscopy, we would share, and let me back up and do an explanation of Share Healthcare real briefly. We're a 501c3 nonprofit Christian ministry. Our ministry is sharing the medically necessary medical expenses of our members. And giving you kind of a example of don't go for the waste, for us it's $349 per month for a family of four. For the average employer-provided health insurance for a family of four across the United States, it's $2,600. So there's that waste between $349 and $2,600. And I suggest that's waste. The people who are receiving that health insurance at that price, they might think, well, it's very much worth it. And it might be more comprehensive than we have. It might include cosmetic surgery. It might include dental and things like that, that for our members, we say, well, those lower price things that you can take care of, then that is something you should be able to take care of. And most dental care is relatively lower cost. And cosmetic surgery, well, that's something you choose. Mm-hmm. And unless it's cosmetic surgery that is medically necessary, such as breast reconstruction after cancer, or facial reconstruction after a really bad accident or something of that nature. So that's the premise that we have, is what's medically necessary. And so because we're doing that, just look at that difference, $349 to $2,600. And then on a bill like this, so if the doctor had said, I have a concern and I want you to have a colonoscopy just to rule out this concern that I have. All right, well, that's medically necessary. You have a doctor who has seen something that causes him, as your practitioner, to have a concern for you. All right, that triggers that medically necessary thing. The doctor says it's medically necessary, as opposed to, well, you're 56, you need to have one every year. No. But the doctor says, well, I'm not sure about this, but I just feel better if you get a colonoscopy. I just want to rule this out. okay, that's what we're there for. And if we receive for somebody a bill of $10,723, our folks, our member services folks, will be on the phone saying, you're charging double what the highest rate is elsewhere. We're going to send you a check for the highest. We're going to send you a check for that, for what would be a higher amount in someplace else. Talk to us if this isn't sufficient. And you know what? We do that fairly regularly because it might surprise people out there, but some doctors and some hospitals overcharge or charge way higher than the people around them do. And guess what? We don't have the doctors calling back and saying, well, I want the rest. It doesn't happen because they know that was an overcharge.
Mm-hmm. But I guess they get away with it with regular health insurance companies.
Well, not really. Let's look at this one. I mean, some companies they do, but not much. What does happen is most hospitals have a charge master, is what it's called, and they've just negotiated prices or really scales with the big insurance companies. Whatever we bill, you will pay 60% of. Whatever we bill, you'll pay 70% of. And so it's typically a percentage of what is billed. So the higher the retail amount, the higher they get paid.
Ah.
And we try to look at, well, what is that hospital charge, but what do the surrounding areas charge, but also what does Medicare charge? Because that's the floor for everybody. And then we do 150%, 160, or 170% of Medicare that we send out to the provider, depending on, is it in-house, is it out-of-house, was this by the institution bill, or is this by the actual practitioner? So we don't have any blowback on that because they're getting paid more than what would be the floor. And because we do that, we're at $349 versus $2,600. Now, those aren't the only, those practical reasons, and pricing and negotiation aren't the only reasons that we are that low. Really, the biggest reason is we're Christians striving to live and operate by biblical law or biblical directives, let's say. We don't have a teetotaling requirement in our application, but it is, do you drink only in moderation, 1 to 3 drinks per week? We do have a teetotaling for tobacco, just no tobacco use whatsoever. We pray for one another, and we have people on staff whose specific job is praying for our members. So because we're trying to be as much in God's will as an entity or individual Christians can be who are sincerely trying to do that, it just winds up having practical effect. $349 is the proof versus $2,600. So we also, I think, helping to change the culture in some ways by just pointing out to people by just the virtue of our existence and by what we do. Hey guys, just take a look around. If we're $349 because of who and what we are, and the surrounding secular culture is $2,600 per month, maybe there's other ways you can look at how to get waste out of your culture, how to live closer to God and thus have better outcomes. Doug, I know you were interested before we came on. You mentioned you were interested in the what's the truth or the validity of the attacks on DOGE, on the Department of Government Efficiency.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's not Christ-centered, of course, but it has the biblical principle of stewardship. When we pay taxes, we're paying taxes to our government to be a steward of that money that we send to them, our tribute, if you're using a biblical term, our tribute we send to them, that they would be stewards of it and return to us services and protections and things of that nature that are equal to the value of what we sent them. Well, what the Department of Government Efficiency is finding out is, nope. There's some things that just don't fit. And we don't even have to look at the extraordinary nature of some of these grants that are being given out, but just sheer waste. How many infants have received a small business administration loan? how many people over 115 years old have received a small business administration loan? Well, why is that? Well, because the fraudsters just capture a Social Security number and make a small business loan with that number. But the Small Business Administration, until Department of Government Efficiency stepped in, until then they hadn't cross-checked that Social Security number to see if that person actually is alive or is old enough to have a business. And those examples that I'm giving are actually what the Department of Government Efficiency has found. You know, the youngest person to get a Small Business Administration loan that they've found so far is literally a 9-month-old baby. Now, that 9-month-old baby will now have a large Small Business Administration loan in their name, which is unpaid. So they'll start life off with a bad credit record.
Oh, gosh.
And then people who have died, but the Social Security number is out there, we're never getting that money back unless you can track down the person who did it, which is probably not going to occur. So just finding those, stopping it, being able to now to set up the procedure for, Small Business Administration, when you're looking at a loan, cross-check to see, is that person real? I mean, just do the basic background check that your local credit union would do.
Well,
so far, go ahead.
I was going to say, I really like the idea, and I try to live by it myself and teach it, and that is that idea of biblical stewardship in all things.
Sure. And, we hear that a person is a public servant. Okay. Well, of our government employees, if people can go on and look at the Department of Government and Efficiency website, and they have a number of tabs for savings and the payments and the workforce and regulations. You click on the workforce one, and it shows the how many employees we have within the executive branch, with 2,252,162. Now, that's not the legislative branch, that's not the judicial branch, that's just the executive branch. And these are supposed to be government servants. But it also shows the range of payments of how many people make what range of money. So there's only 79 federal employees that make less than $20,000 a year. Now, that would include part-timers, too. There's only 2,400 that make $20,000 to $30,000 a year. But guess what? There's 5,375,000 government employees that make $350,000 to $400,000. There's more. Now, think about that. There are more that make $350,000 to $400,000 than make $20,000 to $30,000. And $20,000 to $30,000 is your basic entry level person working in the kitchen or mowing a lawn. I mean, that's what it would be if it's an entry level person in private world. But that's not what we have. The largest category of government employees is making $60,000 to $70,000 a year, which sounds about right. I mean, that should be the largest group of them, but it's only 10,000, or rather, it's less than 10% of all the government workers, but it's the largest single category. So we want to be looking at that, and as we hear about, they cut these jobs, they cut that jobs, okay, what's the problem there? Why are we complaining about how it's been cut? Each one of these cuts that we hear about are relatively minor in percentage of the total employees. Mm-hmm. And it isn't a chainsaw attack on the employee base. It is that the agency head or the division heads are looking at, all right, this division or that division or these employees or the probation employees, which are the ones that have the shortest tenure, which is often if a manufacturer was doing a layoff, that's typically what they would do. The ethical way of doing it is lay off the people, last in, first out, as opposed to the ones who have tenure and have really put a career in there. Now, I know, and I've read about a number of the people who have had a career and it's been cut. All right, well, that happens in the private sector, too. Mm-hmm. And if you were an excellent government employee you ought to be able to find another job if you're an excellent employee at the same level. And if what we are constantly hearing is correct, that the government employees really, they make less than they would in a private field. Okay, well then you're getting, somebody's doing you a favor by laying you off and letting you get out there to get all that money that you've been saying for years you should get. So far, on the Department of Government Efficiency website, they say so far that the actual amount that they've saved is $130 billion. Now that's just a start on the $2 trillion that they're looking to have done by January of next year. Or I'm sorry, July of next year, because this department expires July 4th, 2026 by Governor Trump's order. And they had estimated they'll be able to reduce our spending by $2 trillion by then. Well, they're $130 billion into it, which is pretty good. And their website shows that means it saved $807.45 per taxpayer. All right, pretty good.
I've always said that it's hard for the government to cut anything because that's going to affect even just one person, and that one person is going to turn it into a news story, and then you read the headlines in the news and you think, oh man, the mean old government.
Sure. And that's why also when you see in the press the complaints about the people who have been the gang members who have been deported and sent down to El Salvador, you'll read that some of them may not be in those gangs. All right, of the, I think, 261 people who were named to be in the gangs, the TDA gangs, maybe there were 2 or 3 that were just merely illegal and not in the gangs. So that's a possibility. It's pretty unlikely with the amount of agencies that were brought in to determine where are these people and why should we go pick them up. But let's say that is possible. Okay. Then you shouldn't have put yourself at risk by being around the other people and being illegal also. Because I think Tom Hummond had mentioned that they are picking up non-gang members just because while they are there to arrest a gang leader or a gang member, there are other people present who, when they ask for their ID, they've determined they are illegal immigrants as well, and so they get deported. Well, like you said, the statistics are cold, but when you talk about the problems one person is facing, it makes it, it is a more difficult story to digest. More, we might have more compassion on that one individual issue. Okay, but when we're talking about how to manage a nation, we're necessarily talking about doing things on the average. Now, that doesn't mean we ever want to convict or do anything to an innocent person, but I haven't heard any press yet saying that any of these gang members or any of the people that were deported were innocent. On the savings issue, on the cutting employment, I don't see that any one of these people who had had their employment cut were told, you have a job for life.
Right.
I mean, they were not told that. That just simply isn't the case. And we've had, over our nation's history, we've had ebbs and flows of hiring and firing and expansion of our government and shrinking of our government, much more expansion over time. But even with that, we've had contraction. Well, we're just going through one more. And obviously we have to do it because, I hear politicians, and I've heard Elon Musk say it in interviews, if we don't do this, our nation is facing bankruptcy.
Yeah.
Okay, well, we are insolvent now. If you're insolvent, a creditor can force you into bankruptcy even if you don't file. Well, what is insolvency? Insolvency is you have more debt than you can pay for. We have more debt than we can pay for. And that's just an inescapable truth right now. And, well, why do other nations keep buying our treasury bonds, which essentially is our debt? And when you hear T-bills and all that, those are our debt instruments that we sell with a promise to pay it back at a certain interest rate. Well, there's an extraordinary amount out there that will not be able to be paid for generations. So why are they continuing to buy it? Well, because they have faith in the continuing ability of our nation to go on and print more and keep doing it. Well, at some point, there's going to be a tipping point, and that credibility will not be there anymore. And all of those accumulated T-bills are going to get called all at once. We can't sustain that. And we will definitely then be the servant of the creditor, who are the primarily foreign countries who bought up all these T-bills.
Yeah.
Well, we don't want to have that in our individual household either. You know, I mentioned that we have that amount saved per taxpayer of $807 that so far DOGE has saved each one of us. But that example that I used of $349 for share health care for a family of four versus $2,600 of the average employer-provided health insurance, that's a $2,251 difference per month.
Mm-hmm.
We want to be thinking of that and also thinking of other ways that we can save. Looking at taxes. Have you only done a standard form tax, taking the standard deductions, when really you could do the line item deductions and actually save more on your taxes? Do you live a lifestyle that allows you to deduct more? Are you an employee, so you just get a W-2 and not a whole lot of deductions there? Or have you decided to go into business for yourself and you have a home office, so you have a lot of different deductions that are just there? Do you live on a 5-acre plot, but you don't do any farming on it? Well, if you did farming and had just a little fruit stand out front, how much deductions could you take? Just those things that allow us to be thinking of how can I save money? Do you go out to dinner when it's a coupon night or, you know, kids night free type of thing? I mean, you actually plan to do that. Now, having said that, I'm convicted. My wife and I don't. But we certainly did back when we had, the children at home and had more of a need to do that. So still not being as good a steward as I should, but we don't have that pressing need right now. And there's a lot of people that are listening that might have the pressing need of, $20 a week makes a lot of difference. $200 per month makes a lot of difference. $2,200 a month certainly will make a lot of difference for a lot of the small business people out there that have employees that would like share health care, and the employer just didn't know that they could do that too.
Yeah.
So those are the type of things we want to be thinking of as we're looking at these headlines that are really complaining for everybody.
So if people want more information about share healthcare, including this idea as an employer, for example, what do they need to do?
Well, they can call and speak to a real live human with an American accent, and that's 1-844-SHARE-HC, 1-844-SHARE-HC, or they can go on to the web and look up sharehealthcare.com, sharehealthcare.com.
All right. Well, this is our call to prevent fraud and waste and to be good biblical stewards of what God has blessed us with. Maybe Share Healthcare will do that for you and your people. Sharehealthcare.com. That's Mike Sharman. And for Wave 94, I'm Doug Apple.